Good morning. I'm Sandy Wyatt. I'm a member of this church and I guess a superhero. Let me throw my cape over my shoulder. Before we start, I just want to note that this reflection includes expletives, but Bruce doesn't think they're strong enough, so I'll try to, throw in some more. It also includes topics that may be triggering for others, so please take care of yourself. A few years ago, I wanted to write a memoir about my life with bipolar disorder. I'd read other books by authors who had mental illness, trying to just get a sense of the genre. And they really irritated me because they all focused on the horror story. All of us with mental illness have a somewhat similar horror story: chaos and agony, companions who are steadfast and those who flee, hospitals and jails, drugs, electroshock, self-destruction, and ruin. But what I was interested in, what I wanted to write about, is what happens after the horror story. How do you make a life out of ash? How do you move from the whole of the doily into the thread? For me, it started with flickers of light in my darkness, a conscious decision to look for those flickers and to follow where they would lead me. They shone lights on part of myself that I had abandoned. They presented me with hard work that required a level of courage that seemed Kryptonian in scope. They offered me an adventure. I had always fancied myself a writer. At the University of Iowa, I was determined to get into the writer's workshop, but had my first major bipolar episode and dropped out of school. Still, I wrote. A short story got published in a magazine. An agent liked my novel. But with a job and a husband, I always needed more time to write. However, my characters practiced their dialogue in my head while I was off doing something else. So when I found a few minutes to write, they'd already written the next segment for me. One day, my husband and I were driving on very icy roads, and I needed to concentrate because I was behind the wheel. I needed those characters' voices in my head to be quiet, but I couldn't shut them up, and that really scared me. I thought, I can write or I can go crazy. And so I stopped writing. Years later, after electroshock and the end of my life as I knew it then, I sat in a cafe with a pen and a notebook, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. The muscle memory of pen across paper started a spark. I'd been afraid that writing would make me crazy, but I was crazy, so why not write? I'd always been yearning for more time. Now I didn't have a husband or a job anymore, so I had nothing but time. I wrote what I love most, which is fan fiction. Short stories, novellas, even a whole novel about my heroes. Star Trek characters, Captain America, Batman. Those stories gave me what I didn't have at that time: connection, competence, and meaning. I also started a blog called Mind Divided, which I still write today. And there I wrote about my adventures with bipolar disorder. And I found I was an even better nonfiction writer, which was a total shock. I followed a spark that showed me my first way out of the dark and back to a part of myself I'd thought I'd lost. Another flicker came during a hospitalization. There were many. The psychiatrist then leafed through my chart, frowning. She said, "You've tried almost every medication we have and nothing's helped. I have one more we can try, but..." All of a sudden I knew I have to do this myself. Of course the medication didn't work, but I was already following that glimmer. In my blog, I wrote, I feel a little bit like an apocalypse survivor this time around. Harder, more jaded, a bigger pump-action rifle in my hand. If I smoked, I'd be squinting through the fumes. This business of living is not for weenies. Marcus Aurelius said, "The art of living is more like wrestling than of dancing. The main thing is to stand firm and be ready for an unseen attack." And I think this philosophy applies even more to those of us with mental illness, because the attack comes from within. We have to be ready, we have to be trained and conditioned. So at that time, I started developing my bipolar badass training checklist. What I needed to do between episodes to get ready for the next one. And this again is from my blog. Badassery is about living in tandem with mental illness. Every time the illness loosens its grip, I struggle out from under the dead bodies, wipe the gore off my face, and start the long process of clearing away the wreckage. What I've learned is that there's no way to do this perfectly, there's just doing it. Every day my brain can hold onto some level of stability is a training day. Inertia may drag at me, but badass training means pushing against the inertia. It means holding the tension of doing something that's a little uncomfortable. And the more I can hold that tension, the more tension I can tolerate. Bipolar badassery became a self-generating flicker in the darkness, a way for me to come back. It is hard work. But there's also playfulness, dreaming, exploration. It's how I found art journaling. It's how I found this church. The last spark I want to share came when my therapist went on maternity leave. I had a choice of subs, one of them a young man who looked a lot like Luke Skywalker. I was sexually abused by a therapist in Minneapolis, so I'm not real keen on male care providers, but I thought I can keep avoiding this pain, or I can ask this young Jedi to work on it with me. So I did. During one session with him, I dissociated. My hands and feet went numb, a roaring noise filled my head so that I couldn't hear him, and I felt myself lift up and out of my own body. The young Jedi called my name quietly until I came back. I was ashamed and embarrassed, but he said, "Whatever you're feeling is okay. It's all okay." Those words lit up a whole new path for me, one of radical acceptance and self-compassion. The bipolar badass can be harsh, but this was a call for gentleness. I made a poster for my front door so that I could see it every time I left my apartment. It says, "Kind, gentle, generous." As soon as I relax into my own compassion, suffering eases. Less suffering makes it easier to watch for sparks. Not long ago, I was showing my art journal to the nurse practitioner who works with my therapist. The spread I showed her was pure fangirl, all Marvel comics and broad shoulders. "I have a thing for superheroes," I told her. She looked at me and said, "You're the superhero. I wish more of my clients could do what you do." And of course, that was a spark.